When you imagine urban living of the future, what do you see? You might be pessimistic. The knell of climate change is tolling, housing prices are inflating, and the ranks of the isolated and alienated are swelling. Our prospects might look bleak. The Urban Village project promises a brighter future. Effect Architect's vision for a new kind of urban neighborhood integrates sustainability, prioritizes affordability, and fosters community in a flexible, modular system. We wanted to ask Effect how they did it, and discover how we, as architects, can create designs with positive social impact. So we talked to Effect's head of innovation and the Urban Village project's leader, Casper Reimer.
Hello, guys.
Effect, which means impact in Danish, is a design and research collaborative based in Copenhagen, Denmark. They investigate and design ways that a built environment can be reimagined to serve both people and planet. A hallmark of Effect's projects is their holistic approach to architectural design. Sustainability, affordability, and community, along with beauty, are integrated in their works. They recognize that none of these design goals are feasible unless they are synthesized. Unfortunately, sustainability and community are often undervalued in architectural design. We started off by asking Reimar how he got to this point.
In your opinion, why is this? Why has an architecture uh, been designed to incorporate sustainability?
I think there's a lot of reasons for it, and I think there's a lot of reasons for why we've ended up where we've ended up. But I think one very clear pathway sort of to follow is that form follows energy. So, like previously, before we had industrialization and the fossil fuel era, we were sort of much better at orientating the house, building in these vernacular principles that actually could, because we had no other choice. We needed to make the smart decision based on the actual natural systems. Then, when fossil fuels are introduced, we are now sort of ready to build without any restrictions because it's energy is abundant, so we can basically do whatever we want to do. Then that translate into us now figuring out that that was not the best idea. But then instead of really understanding what the problem is, we keep sort of trying to build it away. So in Denmark, at least, it's a very high priority for the government and for a lot of architecture offices to renovate with a lot of material to ensure that the energy efficiency is as good as possible. But but the general outcome is that people then just turn on their heating systems even more, and then all of the sort of consumption that you think you saved actually just gets increased. So I think what we try to do with the urban village is to look at the more systemic issues and say, why are we not building in the materials that sequester the carbon, and why are we not making it as a design for simply to ensure that we don't just have a responsibility for the construction and the use phase, but also the phase afterwards, and how can we turn these things into sort of strength rather than weaknesses in the design. So I think the reason why we haven't been sort of going in that direction is that the money involved in sort of a speculative development is way too huge, and there is not a need. Like people still buy homes. Everyone, like it's people need a place to live, so there is really no competition. And another thing is that we also saw, which was one of the things we really wanted to connect back to, was that the best case scenario for a developer these days is to never see their client again. I mean, that only means that something is wrong with their building. So we need to sort of get back the relationships between occupants and developers, and that's sort of a fundamental issue because then we are both bound by the same principles that we need to construct a very good building because it will we have to live with it for really a lot of years. So that's what we were trying to do, and I can see like at least in Denmark the movement is very strong now and taking off, but we are still sort of lacking the holistic perspective in a lot of the things that we see going on in these cases. But I think generally it's been a sort of a series of structural systems that has become so strong that they're really hard to sort of break down again. That's what we're trying to do.
So you're saying it's really like a systemic issue. So, and like it's hard for, architects to like find the incentives to like traditionally do these things and like make their building sustainable.
At least I think that's the focus. I think architecture students and architects should have, is to figure out how do we make these sort of burdens become benefits. So how do we release land from the speculative development? How do we build so it's not just on a short-term basis profit? So all of these things are really sort of the key. When you make them the positive or the benefit, you will automatically create adoption within the industry. And that's also what we tried with Urban Village. And we had a lot of people going through the economic model. And of course, there's legislative issues, but in overall, it ended up being a more profitable business on the long run than a short-term one. So if you can compete on the same market, but with a better concept or a better product, that's how you will create adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that your project shows, is that you can have sustainability, but also all of the other benefits. You don't have to compromise anywhere. And just to go a bit deeper into that, what are some more of the ways that the Urban Village project incorporates sustainability?
I mean, we try to have this 360 approach, and that every sort of decision we made were always sort of balancing act between like economics and affordability and sustainability. So of course, we could have done it greener if we wanted to, but we needed to, in order to create the scale and adaptability, we needed to find a balance. So we just used all the best practices that we could get out of that. So we are using with wood to create the sort of carbon sink into the built environment. We are focusing on resource loops. So of course, solar, reduction of energy, and sort of waste management and all that stuff. And then safety, of course, also in the construction phase was also sort of a big part of it, and minimizing the waste from that, because right now I think it's 40% of all waste in Denmark is actually from the construction industry. So we really had to take sort of a holistic look at all sort of the intersection processes that there is in the industry, and say which are the best practices we can adopt now. And then it was super important for us not to choose any technologies or sort of quick fixes that weren't on the market already, in order to ensure that it wasn't sort of this magic bullet technology that would solve it all, but it was more like we could do it right now if we wanted to.
Like sustainability, meaningful interpersonal connection is a critical component of healthy and vibrant urban neighborhoods. We asked Reimar about some of the ways that the Urban Village encourages community.
I think the most important thing is to create informal connections. And I think that's the one thing that no architect talks about, but I think it's almost the most important thing, is that you need to ensure that your infrastructural lines has shared spaces. So for example, a street with no sort of gardens next to it will not enable sort of the community that you want, because the moment you ensure that you can have a social connection during your sort of route, then you increase the chances of real connections happening in the real life. And another great example is that in Denmark, and I imagine also the States, we tend to all the parking spots for our cars are going underground, and that means that we are gonna go down into a basement and go directly with an elevator up to our homes, not actually ever seeing anyone else that lives in the building. But if it was street side parking, your change encounters actually increase dramatically to meet your neighbor and to start having a conversation. So really focusing on how sort of the building and the community can enable these connections are sort of vital. And that's also why we have so much shared space and shared spaces in different hierarchies, because you don't always want the public functions right where you are. You want sort of a gradient of private zones and public zones. So we try to make those informal connections work to our advantages in order to create the informal interaction that would make sense in the project.
And would you say like this sense of like what you said about informal connections and like meeting people, is that something that is particular to the urban village? Because a lot of the same concepts you talked about were stuff that were in like previous projects like the Region Village. And would you say like it's especially true to the urban context to have that sense of community?
Yes, I would say that, and the reason why I would say that, and why we need to think about it much more in urban environments, is that because the way we've built them is basically to avoid each other as much as possible. I mean, of course, we have very public zones, but there is no gradient, and there is very little chance of informal encounters within your neighborhood. But whereas if you live in a rural area, it becomes much more like you're maybe a small village, and then automatically you will meet those people because that's the vicinity of people that are there. But when your pool of people sort of grows, the chance encounters on real connections to spark will sort of diminish if you continually meet the same people. So therefore, I think the urban, it's particularly important in urban environments that we have this.
It's so interesting about the gradient, because in rural environments, it's almost built in because the gradient doesn't extend, all the way to the complete public sort of anonymous situation.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we noticed that, in practice, you definitely really, practice what you preach in a sense with the website. For example, there are places where, people in the community can leave feedback. And of course, you're here talking with us today. And, you talked about developing a relationship between the developers and the community. So how does that impact the design process?
I mean, it does in the way that wherever we can talk about, not even just our projects, but with everyone, I think that always brings new knowledge and new information and new sort of thoughts into how we can work. But one thing that we have been really looking into lately has been this part about how can we bypass developers in actually organizing community land trusts, so a group of people go together to help formalize their own community. And I think that's really where the key is, saying that it's not one person or one sort of developer that has to control how people has to live. They have to have some sort of part in that process as well. And that right now is kind of hard because everything is a speculative developer model, basically, where that part has been left out. Of course, there's some legislation saying that there has to be these informal user meetings, but they never really amount to anything because it's just something you need to check off. So we're trying to take it really serious, but I think we need a structural rewiring of the system before it becomes really sort of a benefit more than it becomes a burden for everyone in the process, because you need to take it seriously from the beginning.
The Urban Village project fosters human relationships by gathering feedback from the community and designing a gradient between public and private spaces. Like how it seamlessly incorporates sustainability into the structure, it smoothly integrates settings of interaction into the architecture. The idea is like really beautiful, and like you said, it makes you think, and maybe that's more, yeah.
But that's exactly that's what we want to achieve, right? And I think as architects, now you're studying architecture, and I think one thing that we have to remember is that we are so uniquely positioned to be able to grasp, like basically architecture teaches you to constantly be curious, because you will never do the same thing. You like everything you do is different. Then one day you do a school, then you have to learn about schools and how they work. Then you learn about hospitals, then you learn about living spaces. And so it's embedded within architecture that we actually don't have one sort of narrow focus, but we are more generalists. We might know a little bit about everything, but I honestly think that's the future. I think the future in a rapid-paced world is knowing a little bit of everything and then combining it in new ways. So I think that's where you have like an incredible strength. And if you understand that very early, everything is a possibility. And you have the tools to communicate about them. That's what architecture teaches you. So I really hope you will continue on that path and be interested in all of these things, because that will lead to real change, and it has to come from you and from all the people that are studying architecture, and because you have such a unique position to do it.
Yeah, and of course, all of us this is what we want to do, right? Is to, create positive social impact through our designs.
That's a
And
good starting point.
yeah.
When I left school, no one wanted to do that. Like literally no one. Like at that time, people wanted to build opera houses and do cool design in forests, and just like it was an egotistical sort of profession. So I think there's been a huge leap, but in order to make that leap sort of really tangible, it's about saying that we need to have empathy for more sort of industries than our own. It's not just about making cool houses. It's about sort of fundamentally designing and changing the systems we participate in.